Welcome everybody. My name's Stephanie Doddick, and today's session is on where do I set the bar? Where do I, so assessing and adapting language for E.A.L students in the elementary mainstream classrooms. So this session is kind of built around K to 6, so hopefully it will be useful in your capacity, whatever you're teaching or whatever you're supporting, whoever you're supporting. And so just like to acknowledge my gratefulness for being on this land, even though it was a very slippery land this morning. So with all the snow, as we transition into winter, I still have a little bit of fall colors on my slide here today, but just thankful that everyone, hopefully that everybody could make it here today, and also that in your travels that you are safe as you are moving about during this change of year. And also very grateful for all the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today, and those who have gone before us, and just recognizing the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those on whose territory we reside, work, and play. So yes, sure there were very many signs that this weather was coming, but yeah, so the snow tires were on, and I made it to my location and back safely. And hopefully you did too. I also have a link in here for the calls to action. If you haven't had a chance to look through those yet, I welcome you to do so. Maybe there's one that speaks to you more than others. One that speaks to me is calling on Canada to respect the rights of Aboriginal people, and this includes their right to have their languages respected. And I know we're in an E.A.L session here today, but also acknowledging the many diverse languages that were here before settlers came, and the wonderful diversity of languages that were there, and just working to keep those languages alive. And what you can do, what I can do, is something that I'm working towards to keep those languages alive as well. So our content objective today is that you'll be able to use language objectives and interactive strategies to assess language and adapt content. And we'll be sharing your thoughts and ideas. You can either through the chat or verbally. And we will have an opportunity to write a language objective with the support of group members, using a template that I have available for you, and a resource from Coloring Colorado. So we'll be looking into that a little bit more. And also, you probably with your registration, you have received a survey. So I welcome you to go into your emails during some point during this presentation, and please feel free to share what learning you got out of this this session today, and also any other feedback that you have to help me in building other sessions where there's needs, what your interests are, and ways that I can also improve my sessions. So always looking for feedback on that. And if there's, because this is also professional learning for me. So I also welcome anything that you have to offer in that. Okay, so we're going to start with a little activity here first. So I'd just like you to complete this task. Yeah, so just give you a couple, minute or so just to complete this task for me. How's it going?
I'm not seeing the task.
Not seeing the task? Okay.
Just up in the top, really tiny.
Okay. Do you see my screen at all?
I do. I see the top where it says activity, but it's very, very, very tiny.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm
Is
not sure what.
that for everybody too? Is that
No, it appears normally here.
okay?
See it normally too.
Okay, so
Okay,
maybe there's
thanks.
some
I'll figure it out.
setting in your screens there. Sorry about that. Okay, awesome. All right, well, maybe if I read this out, maybe that'll help as well. So, lacuna pagalan and pune endelezion. Any help? Does that work? No? Okay, well, all right. We'll move on then. So how are you feeling after that? You know, feel free to unmute or put in the chat after me asking you to complete this activity. What are some things that went through your head? I can't read it. So, was that mean like you can't read it, like you couldn't read it out loud, or you couldn't see it to read it, just to clarify on that? Any others? Any other lost feelings of lost, being lost? Any others? Couldn't understand it. Okay, that's the piece. Couldn't read it, couldn't understand it. Any others? Sounds like Klingon to me. Don't speak Klingon. Nope. Yeah. All right. Any others? I see frustrated, some feelings of frustration. Okay. All right. Okay, so maybe let's just talk about why. Maybe why you're feeling that way. All right, so you know, our language learners, they're seeing some things that, you know, may be a little bit unable to sustain their focus when they're experiencing an overload, and so cannot meet the demands of the learning experience. So you may notice a combination of any of the following behaviors. So you may notice that they shut down. Maybe you felt a little bit like you were going to shut down here. Or you know, maybe you found some other things to do while instead of completing this task. Maybe some fidgeting. Maybe you didn't know, well, maybe this was part of it. You didn't know what you should be doing. Maybe you should avoid some tasks. Maybe you want out of your seat. Maybe you're overwhelmed. Maybe you need constant monitoring to stay on task. Maybe they're easily sidetracked. Maybe daydreaming, having that blank stare, or maybe they're frustrated, or maybe they get bogged down by the task and need lots of breaks, or need more time to complete a task, or have difficulty following the pace of the lesson, or maybe some irrelevant answers or some information that they offer you. So sometimes when the learning is beyond, or the language is beyond the what the learner is able to do, then you may notice some of these behaviors. And this ties into what's called the affective filter. This is from Stephen Krashen's work, the affective filter hypothesis. And he talks about that affect refers to that outward expression of a person's internal emotions. And so a learner who is tense, angry, and anxious, or bored, they may filter out that input and make it unavailable for acquisition. So, and this ties into some of Zaretta Hammond's work, where she talks about the limbic brain. And for those of you who are familiar with that, then you may notice that there's different parts of the limbic brain, the reticular activating system, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. And so the reticular activating system is that part of the brain that constantly looks for possible threats or rewards, and it sends reports over to the amygdala. And the amygdala is that guard dog piece that's trained to prepare the body for flight, to fight, flight, freeze, or appease that anything that might threaten their first physical or social safety. And and it's that part of the brain that sends out the cortisol, the adrenaline, and those hormones that, try to keep us safe. And then the hippocampus is also just that little part where our working memory is part of. And it's kind of where our background knowledge is kept. And a lot of that information processing is happening. So maybe during that activity, you were trying to look for some sort of connections, something that looked familiar to you with that, what you were seeing, so that you could your hippocampus was working and trying to make some sense out of what was going on there. So, and just, also that our hippocampus, and our working memory, that has a significant role to play in language development and long-term memory. And so it's where cognitively our brain interprets new information and makes connections between new information and previous knowledge. So so those are just some things to think about. And when our brain is constantly under stress, it's very difficult to stay on task, pay attention to the learning, and focus. And I don't know if any of you have embarked on a journey of trying to learn another language, but maybe there are times when things aren't making sense, that you just kind of like, ugh, what is that? So you're constantly looking for those connections. And also, as you're learning a new language, and as our students are learning a new language, that adding English to the languages they know, just some of the stages that go through second language acquisition or additional language acquisition, to be put more aptly. But so there's kind of 5 stages that, through research, that they've kind of talked about. And the first one is the pre-production stage, that you'll see lots of observing, listening, and gesturing. So usually in the first 6 months or so that they're being exposed to an additional language, sometimes you see that silent period, and our students may be very, very quiet in those first 6 months. And then there's the early production phase, so that they're, doing some simple comprehension production. They're starting to get some more, build in some more of that vocabulary pieces, some short sentences and things like that. So about 6 to 12 months, and then slowly progressing through. So by 5 to 7 years, if students have had lots of rich and explicit language instruction, they would be at grade level proficiency. So usually takes about 5 to 7 years, and lots of that they have that advanced fluency, that they're using lots of academic language like their grade level peers as well. So, and if you kind of break it down into kind of the, if we look at the benchmarks in a minute, but then, that would be the first pre-production, early production stage would be kind of beginners in their process of learning language. Then there's our intermediate learners. If we group that speech emergence and intermediate fluency stage together. And then there would be the advanced stage. So where they're, just working and using the language of their grade level peers. So, and when we're thinking about students who are and we're working with students who speak other languages, we need to remember that they're coming to you with language, and that first language, and this is something that you may have connected with that activity, that it's the foundation for additional language learning, and it's an important tool for learning, and it's an important component of personal and cultural identity. So yeah, just some of those things to keep in mind. And additionally, so I'm giving you just some background just to think of before we get into the meat and potatoes of this session, but just thinking about comprehensible input. Is there something that I could have done with that activity to make it more comprehensible for you? And thinking about, even in our instruction, some different ways of making things comprehensible. So one, having lots of multiple representations, breaking down that language heavy content by using some visuals. And visuals can include those images, exemplars, graphic organizers, video clips, sentence frames. Sentence frames are a big one. And also tapping into that prior knowledge. So whether it be links to the student's home language, or even just activities such as carousel, doing some research in their home language, and then sharing out about it in English, even using anticipation guides, things like these. That's just a couple of examples. And also speaking, so that I am remembering that speech rate and tone, slowing down, using pauses, speaking clearly, and nonverbal cues, how big they can play a role in that understanding of what the task is supposed to do, and what's demanded of that task. And also when we're explaining, were my explanations of the task, was that clear? Did I give you some step-by-step directions, modeling, showing the end product, and also using some peer support. So thinking of some of those ideas as well. And just remembering that comprehension comes before production. So in order for students to be able to share what they're thinking, they need to understand what's being asked of them and what are they supposed to be focusing on. So thinking about those things. And also thinking about the meta. So, and when we think about meta, we think about metacognitive, just like, and maybe we might think of, Zuckerberg with meta, but this isn't the meta that I'm talking about. I'm talking about trying to make that invisible visible. I'm talking about metacognitive awareness, so where we can think and reflect on your own thinking, where we can regulate our own thoughts. And also metalinguistic awareness, and so that we're looking at the nuances and those uses of language, and have that process of reflecting on the features and forms of language. So whether it be looking at that in English, making comparisons to your home language as well. And also looking at that multicultural awareness piece. So so acknowledging that sensitivity to and the knowledge of a student's own culture, what are their norms, the practices, the traditions, and those in relation to other cultures. So, so that meta awareness, that can happen in any language, but bringing it and helping students to bring it to light so that they can share their meta awareness, whether it be cognitive, linguistic, or cultural, and bringing that to the forefront so that for deeper understanding for that. So with those things in mind, let's try this task again. So lacuna di pagalan and pune indi liotzian. So, oops. And one of the metacognitive things that I'm going to give you is this poster of what to say when you don't know what to say. So this is part of a metacognitive strategy, so that you can, get that language of what to say when you don't know what to say. And that's sometimes with our English as an additional language students, they don't know how to ask for help. And maybe there might be cultural things or things as well, but having a chart, something like this in your classroom, can help students tie and tag into some of those sentences and questions to get some of that so that they know how to ask for help, because all of these kinds of things are what independent learners do just automatically. They ask for more information, or they need some time to think, or they talk to a friend and ask for help, or you know, I think it means whatever. So there is a link in here for creating your own poster, and some instructions on how to do it, and also some instructions on how to translate you know, the poster as well, and so that you can you know, make a small copy for students to access on their own, and so that, you know, they have the language in their home language if they can read in their home language, and then that, you know, maybe you have this poster. I strongly recommend that you take a look at the instructions, because the setting for the page is a 2 by 3 foot poster. So I'll just copy the link for this in the chat, and you will have access to this in just a minute, to the whole slide deck. Yeah, so thinking about that, you know, oh, that's great that they're using it, and that even your non-E.A.L students are accessing that. So that's great. So thinking about that, and thinking about the task that, you know, that we have at hand, that this task, and now I've given you some language, and giving you some language. So from this poster, is there something that you would like? Would you like some more information, some more time to think? Please type in the chat what you would like, so that we can complete this activity. Okay, awesome. You'd like some more information? I can do that. Great. Okay, so here's our lacuna, din pagalan, and pune indilation. And so the first one is lacuna. I'm going to offer you some visuals, and pagalan und pune liation. And I'm just going to model it for you too. And so just watch in the chat. Okay, so I've offered you some visuals. I've offered you an exemplar, and I welcome you to see if you can complete this task now by writing a response in the chat. Welcome. Okay, great. Any others? Okay. Lovely. Welcome, welcome. Perfect. Numeracy assessment. Okay, awesome. Great. Thank you. Awesome. So a couple of visuals and a little bit of modeling, trying to tie into that comprehensible input. And now it's not Klingon, what I've written here. It's a little, I just went for each word in the sentence. I just did a rough, just went to Google Translate and did a little translation. So there's a mishmash of languages in here. So maybe a little bit like after you put it all together. So yeah, so wonderful. Great. Thank you so much for sharing in the chat, and those who are watching the recording afterwards. It was just asking participants to write their name in the chat and what their job is. So lovely. Great. So thinking about that and comprehensible input, and we need to think about what the ideal conditions are for language learning. And we're going to see how those language objectives kind of tie into that. But this is from Elizabeth Coelho and her work, Adding English, a guide to teaching in multilingual classrooms. And so that students have that exposure to vast quantities of language, and that they also have lots of opportunities to interact with more proficient language users. So that there's lots of conversation going on, and that they can kind of work with other students in the classroom. And also that we don't offer them, we don't expect them to understand or produce language that's too far beyond their current stage of language development. So if you're benchmarking them, you would know where they are on their stage of development, and what they're capable of doing, and how you can stretch that for their language progression. And also that depending on where they are on their current stage of language development, that, we have simplified language, so shorter sentences, maybe a slower rate of speech, repetition of words and phrases, and especially for those beginning students, beginning intermediate students especially, that we want to think about, maybe not simplifying it so much that it's not robust, but just making some sentences shorter, and that there's some repetition available for them. And then also having the language strongly linked to context, so that we have some visuals, we have graphic organizers, we have activities that are related to something that's meaningful for them. And that we want to make sure that we don't point out any or criticize any language errors, or correct them, but rather model them, as we're rephrasing them. And then we want to think about language learners' responses and expand upon those, because we all fall into that pattern of just, maybe just giving 1 or 2 word answers. So, working with our students to expand upon those responses. And then also learning language through purposeful use. So having something that's meaningful for them, and, so that they can see kind of the relevance of it. So thinking of lots of situations there. Now, I show this visual often because it is kind of the basis of communicative competence. It's kind of what our benchmarks are based on, and lots of Meryl Swain's work tied into this as well. So in essence, we want all of our students, whether they're learning an additional language or they're just constantly expanding their English skills and repertoire. But we want our students to be able to understand and use language effectively, so that they can communicate in a wide variety of contexts and for a wide variety of purposes. So there's kind of, if you've worked with the previous benchmarks before, that linguistic, strategic, sociolinguistic, and discourse pieces, those would look familiar to you. And they're still embedded in the new benchmarks, but they're more the linguistic and discourse pieces are more at the forefront for the new benchmarks now. So, and Jeff Sweers and Susan Dutro, they talk kind of about a structural sort of idea with language acquisition and academic language. They talk about bricks, mortar, and buildings. So bricks, they tie into that vocabulary piece. So that's vocabulary that's very specific to the content, and concepts that are taught in a discipline. And then there's also those mortar words and phrases that just glue everything together. So if we just said photosynthesis or democracy or whatever. That wouldn't help us pass our PATs or our diploma exams or anything like that. We need the mortar words to, make our phrases and sentences and glue those together so that we can engage in those academic discussions. And then the building piece is kind of the discourse piece, and it's looking at those patterns of organization of text. And what is the purpose of the text type? Are we arguing? Are we persuading somebody? Are we comparing? Are we analyzing? Are we justifying? Are we making friends? Are we sharing what we did on the weekend with friends? So all of those kinds of pieces, they have different buildings, so to speak. They have different structures on how we're using the language. And I'll be showing you in a little bit just how the language structures, so how we're building those buildings, are kind of, they change with depending on the purpose of the language that we're working with. So, so just highlighting too that part of this, this communicative competence piece, this linguistic and discourse pieces are at the forefront with our new benchmarks. So vocabulary, sentence structure, connections and transitions are just kind of on that the key benchmark indicators, the key competency areas that we're working with. And the benchmarks are very, very good for us, and just looking at where our students are at and what level of proficiency that they're working in currently. And so that when we're thinking about the language that we're working with in our classroom, that we're not giving language that's beyond their current stage of language development. It's a good reminder for us to see, like, okay, I'm not going to be asking my students or be using myself lots of a variety of sentence lengths and types like compound and complex at a level 6 when my student is just here that's only able to understand 1 to 2, 3 word utterances. So just thinking about where we're putting our language for comprehensible input and what our students are able to do for a comprehensible output. And, also thinking along those lines with communicative competence and just how that language develops over time, that talking about Jim Cummins' iceberg model and BICS and CALP. So BICS is that basic interpersonal communication skills, and CALP is that cognitive academic language proficiency. And that BICS is our language that's that we need, that language that we need for survival. So that language that we need to make friends on the playground, find our way through the school, find our way in the grocery store, things like that. And the lovely thing about this language is that there's lots of visuals involved. There's lots of nonverbal cues, and it's easier to navigate and understand what the language and what the meaning of the language is because of those visuals and nonverbal cues. And because we need that language to survive. Usually the vocabulary used in BICS is, maybe 1 or 2 syllable words, very simpler words. But when we get to CALP, our cognitive academic language proficiency, where that language becomes much more abstract. There's more cultural references when you think about idioms, metaphors, figurative language, all of those pieces. But that's the language that students need to understand and discuss that content in the classroom. So what we can work with there. So thinking, what can we do to help make that abstract language a little bit more concrete and have some context embedded within it. And also thinking about the language environment. And if you've seen this video, slide before as well, but just thinking about the importance of the language environment, because we want to make the invisible visible. And just thinking that it's made up of two spaces, a physical and a cognitive space, that there's the physical space, whereas that natural is made up of natural or instructed environments. And that natural environment is where that language is used to carry out daily life. And when we think about our students, their daily life is about 6 to 7 hours with us during the day. So what can we support them with in that physical environment, like that poster, what to say instead of I don't know, and having those visuals that they can rely on even when you're not around, that you don't have to constantly be offering them something, but what's in their physical space that they can help come to and buy the language. And then there's the instructed environment, so where there's kind of mini lessons, you're pointing out and building some of that meta-linguistic awareness, and just kind of just making some little mini lessons to help with that language. And then that cognitive space about what are learners expected to do with the language? And again, that's thinking about those buildings, those discourse pieces. Are they thinking about, are they supposed to, argue something? Are they supposed to play with a friend? Are they supposed to compare something, find the similarities and differences? And how they interact with that language shapes how that learner comes to understand and use language. So, for me, I'm trying to learn some French, but if I'm not interacting and using that language, it's going to take me a longer time to build up my proficiency in French, because, I'm just using it at short intermittent. I'm not being asked to constantly use it in an interactive kind of way. And the language environment really ties into that comprehensible input piece, so that we have those multiple representations and lots of interaction with that, and that we're, giving some guidance for our students so that they know what the task is at hand. And also thinking about the piece about how welcome students' home languages are in the classroom. And, is there space for them to draw on their entire linguistic repertoire in their learning? So because their language doesn't stop, as soon as they walk, or their home language doesn't stop as soon as they walk through the school doors or the classroom doors. They're constantly, like you are in this situation, trying to make connections to what you already know, and trying to make sense of what's going on. So we need to think about how we can get all of those interaction skills between the receptive and the productive skills. So that there's the reading, the listening, the speaking, and the writing, and so that there's opportunities for that comprehensible input and comprehensible output, and that language is being used through purposeful use. So, like this little guy here, he's trying to study for something. He reminds me of me when I was in the 7th grade. I thought I could just sleep on my notes and put them under my pillow, and then I'd be fine for midterms or finals. But that didn't work quite that well. But so we want to have that interaction so that they're making sense of what's going on with the content at hand. So thinking about comprehensible input, and I'm going to give you some strategies before we actually get into the writing of language objectives, because this is kind of an important piece for building language objectives. Multiple representations can happen through a variety of ways, and they tie into that, the ideal conditions for language learning, having those exposures to vast quantities of language, and through repetition. So we need exposure to those words, phrases, and structures using different modalities. So a minimum of 7 to 10 times in order to learning to go from working memory to long-term memory. But, just, okay, we did it 7 to 10 times, over these couple of days, that may help, but then that we're constantly coming back to those ideas. So I have some resources and some ideas in here for you, and that maybe you're already doing, and maybe that you want to add to your repertoire, but some partner and small group sharing. I have linked in here an article that you may want to take a look at, just talking in class and having some strategies. So building that oracy component. So there's a link in here. And before I go on, I just realized that I was going to share this presentation for you. And so just give me a second and I will do that. Sorry about that. And you should have that in the chat now. Here we go, hopefully. And so just thinking about multiple representations, having partner and small group sharing, the more students are talking, the more it's just going to bring down that stress level, get students working and building on that communication piece, because that's kind of that oracy piece is the basis for literacy, it's basis for reading, for writing, so many aspects there. I have a video in here about oracy in the classroom, in an elementary classroom. And maybe you've seen it before, it's been around for a little while, but just, how we can use sentence stems and groupings and things like that to develop our speaking skills in our students. Again, use of visuals is hopefully you noticed in the activity, but how that can help with understanding as well. Sentence frames, I'm going to go into a little bit more about sentence frames as we go through, but they are an amazing, simple resource to use in your classroom to help students, just with that bricks and mortar. The sentence frames are the mortar, and then just having students be able to put in the bricks and show their understanding of what that may look like. Looking at anchor charts so that relate to that current learning. One idea is some interactive word walls, and how that can relate to that as well. And then, targeted vocabulary, which words are important for the context, what can you do for that? And, through some activities like matching exercises, like adding a visual to vocabulary, sorting, categorizing, some of those ideas as well. And, just looking at what visuals can do. So, in our, especially in our starting in grade 1, our new curriculum, working on those word families, and that phonological awareness and hearing the rhymes, but what a significant role visuals can do to that, because students may be able to read and fluently decode afterwards at, sat, hat, cat, pat, mat, but asking them what is a mat, or go to the mat, or pat your head, they may not know what that means. So adding just a quick little visual that will make sense to them, it can play a huge role. And then putting that, like the cat in the hat is on the mat, and developing some sentences that are purposeful and make sense to the student. And, you could reinforce that new vocabulary by matching the visuals to the words. And even, maybe if you're doing some activities in the classroom that maybe one set of your classroom has the visual, and then the other set has the word, and then the students have to partner up based on, like, where's the hat one person has the word hat and the other person has the visual of the hat, and they come together, and that's how partners are made. That's just an idea. And just, as I've said before, visuals, they tap into that student schema, that hippocampus, part of that working memory. And, so we want to reinforce and try to find as many possibilities for having visuals to support that. I've put some resources in here for you on, where you can find some visuals that maybe for the most part free. Lesson Picks is, one resource. I think there's a couple that you can use for free, but it's not too expensive. But they're, and I think from this previous slide here is where I got these visuals from Lesson Picks, and I think it's $40 or so a year. And but the rest are all free. Canva Education is free pick, all of those places as well. And there's also resources like Cleanup Pictures. If there's a picture that you find and you want to take some things out, you can just kind of rub it out. And also you can remove backgrounds using the remove background link. And, visuals, again, attached with graphic organizers, so thinking about how this picture here, they've been, aptly looking outside my window and seeing all the snow that I hear. They're working on snowmen, and thinking about some sentence frames that are tied into that. So and they have a little graphic organizers: snowmen are, snowmen can, snowmen have. They have a word bank. They have parts of the body. They have visuals. Maybe around in their language environment, maybe they have pictures of what happy and big and other from these word banks, what those might look like. So, and when you think about the higher level of thinking that's needed to do this activity, lots of sorting, categorizing, that's a really good assessment piece to see if your students actually understand the vocabulary that's being provided for them. And, ways to stretch that is, okay, so they're going to be able to write some simple sentences based on this graphic organizers, like snowmen are big, right? So they can write some sentences with that. But how can we stretch that? Thinking about, okay, maybe we can introduce some compound sense or compound, how to construct some compound sentences, like by introducing and or but or. So just stretching that a little bit through those different discourse pieces, and thinking about our benchmarks and looking, okay, they got some simple sentences here, but what can I do to stretch them a little bit further? And again, this language is learned through purposeful use. So lots of structures with it. These are some ideas from Katie Topple. If you follow her on formerly known as Twitter, then she has some great ideas, especially for early elementary, especially in that K1, K2 world. Then lots of use of visuals, lots of great ideas. She's also one of the new writers for, she's also one of the writers for the new version of the Making Comprehensible Input for Multilingual Learners book. So she's a great resource to look for. So, looking at, here's a paragraph frame. She's introducing some signal transition words and sequencing words. So first, next, last, and introducing the visuals with it. So here, these visuals are all the bricks, and what she's supporting here is, and what she has in words are all the mortar. So students can plop in what works in the blanks, and then they have this that they can read and share and work with partners, and slowly build their profile or their linguistic repertoire in English. Here's another example. You know, this is for the legacy curriculum. That's for science. I don't know, some school divisions are still using the old 4 to 6 science curriculum. Some have transitioned to the new, but this is just one from the Weather Watch curriculum, and you know, how just adding a visual and a couple of sentence frames, then students can, you know, share countless ideas and pull lots of information from just the visual and these sentence frames. So, you know, like cumulus nimbus clouds are larger than stratus clouds. And so they can just slowly match those up and build, and talking with a partner, and you know, writing things down, and you know, just making it a little bit more, finding out those patterns of language. So these are some other ideas. So some sentence patterning charts, you know, from Katie Topple as well. And there's a blog here from Shonda Fucano about sentence patterning charts. Again, lots of visuals in these examples. Maybe some of these kids are maybe, you know, maybe at the intermediate level and still using these sentence patterning charts and taking these words and putting them in the order that the sentence is. Here's a little video from Katie Topple on the sentence patterning chart. But what I really like about this idea is that, well, from these ones, you can see, you know, you can introduce possessive case as well. But because the structures in English isn't necessarily the same for all languages, right? So we tend to have our adjectives before our nouns, and you know, we have our nouns before our verbs, and then like our subject and predicate sort of ideas, and then have our prepositional phrase at the end before our adverbs. But these aren't things that are, you know, automatically the same in all languages. You know, I'll use French again, for example, like adjectives come after the noun. And, you know, some languages, they only have certain tenses. There's languages that don't use the past tense or use it differently than we use it here. So this is an example where, you know, the discussion about different animals and things that you would see in the ocean, and different ways of describing that, and you know, looking at and building some of that language with that, and you know, having these little post-it notes in front, then we can introduce some of that irregular verb tense, right? So we can see that swims is swam and eats is ate, and introduce some of those pieces. So just a quick little thing that you can put in your visual, in your language environment. And also just thinking about how you can reinforce that sentence patterning by reconstructing sentences, taking a sentence, cutting it up, have students work together to build it back together again. Oops.
Sure.
So, and you know, all of these, just making some of that mortar and the vocabulary a little bit more visible for students. And because students, like all language learners, we're wanting to take what we know and map it onto the language that we're learning. And, you know, our pterodactyl friend here, you know, he's taking what he knows about the sound t and mapping that onto what he's learning about English. So is he actually wrong here? No, not in my opinion, no. But it's taking some higher level thinking to, you know, make some sense of the world. And, you know, again, we want to tie that in and not hold those great expectations, or have those expectations that are too far beyond the student's current stage of language development. And thinking about that academic language, you know, we want to, you know, thinking about our students, that they're having lots of exposure to the different ideas of academic language, and that it's made visible for them, so that the discourse piece in science, history, math, and English language arts is going to be different. So how can we make that a little bit more apparent for our students, that when we're using science language, science speak, that that students understand that there's this is the way that scientists talk, and this is the way they write, and this is the way they think, that meta piece as well. And what can we do in math, history, English language arts? Again, that meta piece, right? And tying that into communicative competence, because we want our students to have that broad use and that broad ability to understand and use language for those wide variety of contexts, wide variety of purposes. So when we think about academic language, there's a wide variety of purposes, right? So, but then at the same time, trying to keep that comprehensible. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes just talking about academic language functions and those purposes of language, and tying it into communicative competence. And, you know, I mentioned before about the buildings, and that's our academic language functions. They have different purposes dependent. So the function of language is dependent on its purpose. So use it to describe or explain or persuade. And then we have structures that refer to the words themselves, and that they're strung together into phrases, sentences, and paragraphs. And again, tying that into the communicative competence. And, you know, just again, just to highlight that language functions, they're the specific uses of language for certain purposes. They happen in oral and written communication. And, you know, there's a multitude that happen over the course of the day. But the language structures are the grammatical form that's being used. And so they include the phrasing, the keywords, the grammatical usage. And again, that students are going to, you know, try to map on what they understand about the different language functions, and try to, you know, map it onto what we're doing here in English. But we need to be aware that, you know, those different languages, they construct their buildings and their discourse pieces differently. So we need to support students with that. So this is a document. I'll just put the link in the chat. You have the presentation available for you in the chat as well, but just here for you. So this just it's a couple of page documents. I've just taken a screenshot of the first page here, but you know, so when you're thinking about academic language functions, that, you know, where maybe the student is seeking information, or they're informing, so, or they're comparing. But if we look at this column here, this third from the right, the language structures, key signal words. So when a student is seeking information, then the language structures that tend to be used more often, predominantly, is the to be, the action verbs, and the prepositions. So when we're asking them to define or identify or select or record those kinds of tasks, then we need to make sure that our students have this this part of their language. So do we introduce it through a sentence frame? Do we introduce it through like a little mini lesson? And, you know, what can we do to support our students with that language structure so that they can complete these tasks? You know, so for comparing, if they need to identify or illustrate, then do they have some of these signal words available to them, that they know that when they're comparing, that they have those these language structures available. And some other ideas too is looking at, you know, when our students if you're looking at the benchmarks, there are the connections and transitions continuum available. And then there's a number of functions that they need to connect or add or show time or compare and contrast or express a condition as well. So, and, you know, just an added piece as well to thinking about the K-3 Alberta math team for ARPDC. They've put together a list of verbs that you can find in the math curriculum in this instance. I don't know what's going with the other subject areas, but definitely for math, they've put together the action verbs for the math curriculum. This is hyperlinked in the document. I'll put a link in the chat though for you. And just thinking about, okay, so if a student is approximating that they come close to, be similar to something in quality, thinking about what language they need to show approximate and how are they going to show that. So thinking about language objectives, we want language objectives to tie into, just the content objectives, thinking about content objectives, they're the what. So we often plan very well for the what students need to learn about the content topic, but language objectives are also the what they need to learn about English so that they can learn, express, practice, and apply that new information, demonstrate knowledge, and perform academic tasks. And sometimes we think, especially as we get into the higher grades, sometimes we teach our content in the absence of language and literacy, but when we're testing that content, there's always the presence of language and literacy. Prats and McCurry pointed that out in a presentation that that I was learned about from a colleague. And so when we're thinking about language objectives, we need to think about the learning goal of your lesson. Is it to complete a worksheet or is it the content of the worksheet? And what does students need to know to understand and explain concepts, accomplish a given task, and how are they going to work cooperatively with others? And just thinking again that language is learned through purposeful use. So we're learning how to compare, we're learning how to analyze, and we're supporting the language with that. And just again, that language and content, they're tied, connected with one another. As Tan Nguyen says, content is the inhale and language is the exhale. And like I try to say that you can't drink with your mouth shut. So we need to be talking. We need to think about the language that's happening in the classroom. And that's kind of the elephant in the room. The language, how can we make that more visible for our students? And just thinking about how they tie into the benchmarks. So using those language objectives with the benchmarks, they provide that easy and ongoing assessment measure to monitor that language development. And they also offer that opportunity to reflect on the language demands of the lesson. So, which can result in lesson design, looking at multiple ways that students can access the content. So just as an example, just going to share some ideas with you here, and thinking about grade 4 Wheels and Levers unit. I'm going to, if I take this document, this academic language functions and language structures document from Coloring Colorado, and if I went Control F, I would find the following tasks. So I would find demonstrate, I would find explain, demonstrate again, compare, identify, explain, demonstrate, predict. I'd find all of these tasks in that Coloring Colorado document. So, and I'd also want to think when I'm designing a language, my language objectives for my unit, I'd also want to think about the content demands, the language demands, and the cultural demands of my final assessment tasks. So, so what do I need to be aware of while I'm designing that final assessment task, backwards design, and so that I can plan my lessons accordingly to work towards that assessment. So if I was taking that Coloring Colorado piece, I take one outcome, one objective, and students will be able to compare wheels and rollers and identify examples where each are used. And then so my language objective might be describing that they'll be able to describe wheels and rollers using the Frere model with a partner, or they'll be able to compare wheels and rollers using terms similar to, different than, with partners in an inside-outside circle. That's one example of a language objective. So I want thinking about what I want my students to know and how are they going to show it. So, and language objectives also think about all the 4 strands of language. So thinking about how are they showing it? Are they going to be writing it, reading it, reading and interacting with it? Are they listening? What could it be? So these are different examples. I can, for historical models of democracy, I can analyze the structure of democratic principles in ancient Athens and the Iroquois Confederacy. So I can write a comparison of ancient Greece and the Iroquois Confederacy using words like similar to, different than, although, based on, opposed to, with a partner. And I could read my comparison to my partners in an inside-outside circle. Again, content is what we want our students to know, but the language objective is how are they going to show it. And a science example, they'll be able to identify the 3 main types of clouds by matching their description to a picture. And that kind of ties into that visual I gave you before. And I can orally compare the 3 main types of clouds with a classmate using terms higher than, lower than, larger than, or smaller than. And again, what do I want them to know and how am I going to show it? So think of it kind of as an exit slip. Like, what's one thing out of that lesson that you want your students to walk away with and be able to show? From the new curriculum, thinking about your skills and procedures, and those are mostly the tasks that are associated with the various academic language functions, and that ties into that ARPDC resource about the K-3 math verbs as well. And so if I pick a knowledge piece like this, the particles of matter have space between them, and I think about my Coloring Colorado resource, and I find the word represent in that document, then that kind of comes under that inform academic language function. So I need to make sure my students understand adjectives, they have some descriptive language, maybe superlatives, comparatives, some of those pieces. And I'm not going to pick all of them in one language objective. I'm just going to kind of focus on one that I want my students to build proficiency in. And maybe that they're going to use comparatives and superlatives. Maybe I have a little mini lesson and a word bank on comparatives and superlatives. And then they'll be able to verbally describe the space between particles using comparatives and superlatives and a visual in an inside-outside circle. I don't know if you can tell, but I really like inside-outside circles because I use them a lot in my language objectives. So that interaction piece. So there's a little template for you on choosing an action. So your first step is choosing an action word connected to a domain, like a reading and writing, speaking, or listening. And the next step is you want to link it to your academic content. And then you're going to add some scaffolds like graphic organizers, videos, visuals, whatever it may be. And then what's that interaction piece? So with others. So is it group or pair work? What could it be? So because language happens when we're interacting with one another. So there needs to be, I highly recommend there be an interaction piece with that in when you're designing a language objective. So that's kind of some 4 steps using language objectives for instruction. And again, the language objectives, they help you with your design of your lesson, so that you're looking for those language scaffolds and the language that your students may need to complete the task. And maybe some of your, oops, sorry, don't see my presentation slides. I'll try that again. So looking for those connections. Sorry, trying to, oops, I put the wrong thing in there. Copy link. Let's try that again. Okay, my apologies. And let me know if you got those. And so yeah, just thinking about the language that students need to show their understanding of the topic and your content. So, and it just like makes it much more visible for them. And it helps with our teacher clarity by giving those clear instructions. When we think back to comprehensible input and making our explanations clear, having language objectives really ties into Hattie's work with teacher clarity and the steps to teacher clarity as well. And just to make it more clear that we just don't want to keep our language objectives hidden to ourselves, we want to share those language objectives with our students at the beginning and the end of each lesson. They should be displayed, reviewed. Think about that physical space in your learning environment. This is having your language and content objective displayed and reviewed adds to that physical space of your language environment. And just some ideas from Carol Salva, using academic language in your language objectives and your content objectives is okay, because when we're annotating it with our students, that we can kind of build on that repertoire, so that we're giving them not only like the word inferences, but we're also showing them here, what inferences mean. Maybe, depending on your student, maybe they know what inferences mean in their home language. Share that, what does it mean, or evidence as well. So just so that, that we have that teacher clarity piece, that the goals and the vocabulary are understood by everyone. So we want to talk about our language objectives as well. Again, just a couple more advantages of those language objectives. It gives the students a target of what to pay attention to, and it also gives teachers a target of the language that the student is using during the lesson. So it allows for those anecdotal notes to use for benchmarking, and just thinking about those anecdotal notes. When we're thinking about the benchmarks, we can only collect the data for the benchmarks if we're intentionally planning for the data to be collected. And setting language objectives allow for collecting of evidence between those reporting periods. So that we can, just like when we're dealing our content objectives, so that we have something when we're thinking about our report cards, we've set content objectives so we know if our students have reached that learning outcome. But it's the same for language objectives, that we want to see how that growth has happened. But the only way we know if that growth has happened is if we're being intentional about looking for that growth. I'm just looking at the clock here, and we've got a few. I'm just going to send out a quick poll just to see where you're all from. I'm just like which grades you're working with. So I'm just going to launch this poll here. And so if you could just tell me if you're in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, wherever it may be. And then so that I can kind of put some groups together. We'll just have a few minutes for setting some of those objectives. So we've got a couple in grade 2. One more, if anybody. Okay. I haven't gotten everybody yet, but maybe some people had to step away. So, okay. So we've got a couple in grade 2, a couple in grade 4, a couple in grade 5. So I'm going to open some rooms here. So for create some breakout rooms here, and just based on that results, so that you'll have a couple of partners to work on. Where's my breakout room? There we go. And that I'll just let you choose yourselves. Great. And rename. So we've got some for grade 2 and grade 4 and grade 5. Okay, so I'll just share with you, we won't have 10-15 minutes, but hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes or so just to go through with a partner. So you'll choose the breakout room that corresponds to the grade you teach, and then you know, if you have a split class, then maybe just choose one grade. Are there any split classes? Before I ask, before I go. I'll keep an eye on the chat for that. So introduce yourselves, and then maybe you can work with one another, develop a language objective for an upcoming lesson, whether it be just for one, maybe it's science, maybe it's math, maybe it's E.A.L, whatever it may be, you know, just kind of come up with one language objective for an upcoming lesson. And then maybe we'll have some sharing afterwards so that the person with the longest commute maybe share one of the language objectives that are created. So I'm just going to pause the recording here. And and Ashley, you were thinking of your science unit?
Yeah, I was just gonna get them to compare at the end of the lesson, like if we're talking about weather instruments, so get them to use a sentence frame for like this instrument and like choose one is different from this instrument because, and fill that in. So
yeah, great. I love it. Like, so just I popped into her room before, and Ashley, she was going to do like a gallery walk, and you know, students are going to explore the different instruments. So just yeah, and that sentence frame at the end is a great idea. So awesome. Thank you so much for all that, and for sticking a couple extra long little while longer. I just wanted to also share with you that if you're looking for some more ideas on how to build that interaction in your classroom, and I realize I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Or, no, I better do that. So, oops. So there we go. Just thinking that there's the E.A.L toolkit that's new and revised here, and you'll find it embedded. You click on the link on the slide deck, you'll get that, but there's also, I'll just put it in the chat here for you as well. So just, you know, if you're looking for some more routines and things to put into place in your classroom, there's lots of ideas, different ideas on building some of those interaction pieces, some more information about language objectives and things like that. So hopefully you're feeling a little bit more comfortable about using language objectives to help with designing your lessons, and also how they can be used to support you in your work with benchmarking and, you know, monitoring students' language development through the use of language objectives as well. So Are there any questions or anything? I know I've
Just had one question.
yeah.
For the benchmarks, where do I find those?
Oh, sure. We'll just kind of get out of here. If you're familiar with the supporting English language learners, the Learn Alberta site, maybe you've gone here. I'll just put in the chat. And so the legacy benchmarks, you can go through all those, but the new benchmarks are in this green section here. I'll just copy the link as well, and put those in the benchmarks or in the chat, sorry, for you. So yeah, so some divisions are still using a 1.0 for various reasons, and some divisions are using 1.0 also for various reasons. So yeah, so you can take a look through there. And if you have any more questions about that, yeah, please feel free to reach out. And I think, do I have no, I don't have my email in there, but I can just put it in the chat here. It's Stephanie.Dodyk, DODYK @ERLC.ca. So, and yeah, so those are some resources for you as well. But this toolkit, it has lots of different resources in there for you, from welcoming to intake to these routines to develop language development. And this planning for language development page is specifically devoted for language learning targets, language objectives as well. So if you're looking for some more information on that, feel free to go through there. So yeah, I really appreciate your time, sticking it out a little bit longer, and yeah, coming and learning about this. And if you have some more information or questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Just stop the recording here.